Sorry, okay. Good morning. We will start our session titled Environmental and Energy Policy. I am Giorgos Velegrakis, and I will be the moderator. The session will be in English, as you know, and in order to save some time, I'm giving an overview of all the presentations. Just I'm giving the titles, and then we will go on with each one. So we have a presentation called Participatory Approaches to Face Natural Hazards, the case of Kalloni, Lesvos, flood mitigation measure selection by Ourania Tzoraki, Elena-Ioanna Koutsovili, and Aliki Kalli. We then have hybrid landscapes, material flows, and bioprocessing in the Lausitz region by Christina Krampokouki. The third presentation is Green Finance and Participatory Approach in Renewable Energy Projects, Study of an Alternative Investment Fund by Tamara Well. And finally, Radically Open Participatory Practice in the Face of the Climate Emergency by Powis and Christina Serifi. Since we have two presenters here, I would, if you agree, we can start with you. Is it okay? So we start with the presentation by Christina Krampokouki, titled Hybrid Landscapes, Material Flows and Bioprocessing in the Lausitz region. So, να δώσω το μικρόφωνο ή να ξεκινώ.
Hello, my name is Christina Krampokouki, and welcome to the project with the title Hybrid Landscapes, Material Flows and Bioprocessing in the Lausitz regions that concerns the rapid transition of a coal landscape to a new landscape and try to define and propose new solutions. The project aims to answer how can we imagine the future countryside of a former coal mine, and what are these future components of this landscape that connect the local production, consumption, and storage of distinctive energy forms along the restoration processes and citizen engagement. The first hard coal was mined in the West Germany in the 19th century, and after coal crisis reduced considerably and phased out in 2018. From the other side, lignite production in Eastern Germany, after a remarkable drop in the 1990s, operates until today. By 2038, the lignite mining areas have to be closed according to Climate Protection Plan 2050. The region that I researched is Lausitz, one of the biggest lignite mining areas in the Eastern German states of Brandenburg and Saxony. Since the early 1990s, it has closed many open-cast mines to upgrade facilities, and rehabilitation has started. Up to 550 square kilometers of the removed landscape are already reclaimed successfully, with 10,000 hectares agricultural land and 30,000 hectares afforested. In total, 52% of closed mines are converted into forest, 25 into water, 10 into fields and meadows, and 12 into other uses such as green energy. However, the Lausitz region retains still some of the mining activities, such as in Jansvelde, Velgesund, and the Highfeld mine, as we can see the map with yellow color. One of the restoration processes is the conversion into water, and specifically into the technical lakes, such as Lusatan Lake District. The Lusatan Lake District is now Europe's largest artificial lake area, where 24 artificial lakes and 140 square kilometers of water surfaces is newly available for swimming and boating. In 2018, it has started to be constructed the biggest artificial lake in Germany, called Bush Eastern Lake. Along with the lake, new touristic infrastructure landscape as a new ecological infrastructure integrates biophysical systems and engineered, providing a new ecosystem. Nevertheless, decades of lignite mining caused a huge catastrophe to the environment and in particular to the ground. Influenced by the maps of critical zone and Brunello Natur, it is created a diagram of the new soil. Starting from the center, emissions of mining are trapped in the atmosphere, creating inner flows. Oak trees or pines and less agricultural crops, such as forages and cereals, are on the ground. Moving now on the underground, the lignite layer is approximately 10 to 20 meters thick and is covered by 40 to 120 meters, consistent of sands and gravel. Soils at these sites are predominantly affected by higher acidification potentials and the low nutritional status. The biggest part of mining turns as we send into open pit lakes. In order to get the coal out of the ground, huge amounts of groundwater have to be pumped out, and as a result, the groundwater sinks. When this happens, the surrounding rocks of the mine get exposed to air and water, causing it to rust, while iron oxide sulfate is created. As these mines close down and pumping operations cease, the water level climbs back to its normal levels and floods the mines, but the rust chemicals resulting in a very acidic water. With the help of the rain, the contaminated water runs into the Spey River nearby, and this process is known as the formation of acid mine drainage. So the question is, how can we tackle the acid mine drainage and the pollution of the area? And what is the future economy of the Lausitz after the coal mining? Brown is the new green, mentions Belanger. By using the pollution and the waste of the soil and earth resource for energy, we could create a new circular economy. Algae systems as a closed loop, a systemic approach, generates value from polluted water and remove a considerable content of metals from acid mine drainage, providing a crucial economical and environmentally sustainable service. So the material flows will be changed. In flow chart, with blue color is designed existing flows, with dotted lines the indirect flows of the area, with yellow the polluted actors, and with green the algae. The emissions of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and mercury that are produced by coal is going to be harvested by algae while producing O2 to grow. After the cultivation, the wastewater is cleaned and can be used either for agriculture uses or filling the lakes and watering the forest. The first phase of algae cultures is going to be developed next to power plants of Lausitz region, since carbon dioxide is required for rapid production. The three regional coal-fired power plants, Jansvelde, here, Boxberg, and Schwarze Pumpe, are among the largest point sources of CO2 emissions of Germany. For example, the Jansvelde lignite power plant has emitted around 20.8 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2019. If 1 acre of algae shall be able to capture about 20.7 tons of day of CO2 emissions, in case of Jansvelde, it is needed to be planted 91 square kilometers of algae. After 20 years, the algae cultures shall develop around the power plants of Lausitz, either on open cast mine or on the surface of lakes as a floating system. The diagram shows how the existing land uses of Lausitz around the city of Corpus and Sprecher could be involved into an algae culture. The algae system is located between city, coal mine, and the river flow in order to absorb the emissions and clean the water. The timeline of Lausitz will have to project and propose future changes. The timeline includes future and recent actors such as forest, agriculture, mining, groundwater, and algae that will change the landscape, and factors such as drought that is destroying the area. As we can see, the groundwater starts to balance due to the gradual exit from coal mining. However, in the coming years, long periods of extreme dryness should be expected that has impact on lakes, forests, and agriculture, as in the case of former Cottbus North open cast mine, which stopped the flooding soon afterwards a dry summer. The next years, the size of the lake should be decreased, and as algae culture changes the acidification, new recultivated systems could be used, such as floating wetlands. Progressively, mines are transformed into lake surfaces, and then it should change into cultivation of algae, and finally in cohabitation of constructed wetlands and algae for the future, altering the quantity and the quality of the groundwater. For the rapid growth of algae, not only CO2 emission is needed, but also nitrogen and phosphorus. To increase the behind phosphorus on farm organic materials produced by bioprocessing, such as composted animal manure, should be used. The organic material grown around mining, such as energy crops and forests, are transformed to biorefineries in order to produce bioproducts and then feed the algae. As phosphorus is enhanced, algae are growing, and new bioproducts are produced essential for fertilization. Algae production increases the development of agriculture and forest, and vice versa. Finally, agricultural cooperation could lead to a circular economy. So how citizens can participate and contribute to this process? Across Germany, citizens have taken a direct stake in the transition to a cleaner energy supply through ownership or shareholding of renewable energy installations. In order to grow algae around mining areas, it is needed to cooperate with municipalities, government, universities, and researchers. The mining areas in Lausitz is owned by Lag Company, which the next years is going to sell part of the Ourania mine. Different ownership can shape the future energy system of Lausitz, such as farmers, companies, and public sectors. Energy cooperatives based on algae will be created with the support of government and the knowledge of researchers. The citizens could not just be participants, but also co-owners, giving them the opportunity not only to have access to energy system, but also to the byproducts of algae. A local algae market, as we can see in the image, is going to offer food, cosmetics, and biomaterials for building blocks. The bioproducts and energy are to be used by locals and neighbor areas, creating new communities. The next picture shows a future image of the area where citizens, farmers, and scientists work in a floating algae system. To conclude, Lausitz area is a transitional landscape that tries to heal damaged soil by filling it with water. However, by making a vertical section of the ground, we reveal the hidden effects of the Anthropocene and observe that groundwater continues to travel oxygen metals to the area through lakes and rivers. Using algae systems, absorb hidden toxins in water and soil, and a new bioeconomy is creating, working together with forest and agriculture. The landscape could again be productive while producing another form of power and energy. The citizens become producers, consumers of energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. I propose to have all the questions at the end, or do you prefer to do some questions now? I think it's better to the end. Do you agree?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So we go on with, I need to have my notes. So we'll go on with the other presentation that they are here. live with us. So it's the radically open participatory practice in the face of the climate emergency by Christina Serifi and Anthony Powis. Christina is here with us. Yeah. And I can see Anthony already here. So let me put the PowerPoint on.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great.
It's this one we said, right? No, this one. This one. You have the mouse.
Anthony, would you like to start?
Sure, yeah. Okay, hi. Everyone can hear me? Great. Good morning. So Christina and I are two members of a research collective called MOLD. We're based in London at Central St. Martin's School of Art and Design, and in Germany at the Technical University of Braunschweig, members also in Berlin. We're currently undertaking a project called Architecture After Architecture, Spatial Practice in the Face of the Climate Emergency, which looks at ways in which the climate crisis challenges the fundamental constitution of the architectural profession, starting from the position articulated by Jason Moore and others that the climate change is not a product of humanity as a whole, but of capitalism and the modes of thought with which it approaches and appropriates nature. And in this context, established forms of architectural practice, we suggest, are a servant of capitalist modernity that are founded on and feed that model of economic growth and progress. So in our project, we tried to think from within the climate crisis about possibilities for another architecture that depart from this model, very broadly. For this panel, we thought we'd like to contribute a perspective on, or at least begin to wonder with you about how participatory practice might intersect with this need to rethink architectural practice in the face of the climate emergency. And of the many things that the climate emergency forces us to rethink is the imagined separation between human subjects on the one hand and objectified natures on the other. The modern project was predicated on this separation, subjugating the non-human and rendering it mute so that it can be exploited and extracted from. And the supposed separation, the casting out of nature as something inert and unresponsive, as just a resource from which we can make things, is necessary to capitalist extraction of materials, of labors, of knowledge, and therefore conventional architectural production. Design here becomes about converting these inert things into useful things, including energy that we can then consume. But in place of this dichotomy, we are in the Anthropocene confronted by an Earth which has its own agency, which forces us to rethink the way we understand it, and therefore we need to radically rethink architectural production based on, as Donna Haraway describes, a firm conviction that we need each other's sensibilities, including those of non-humans. And this means a form of architectural practice that is not a project of problem solving with a beginning and end, but of negotiation. So in short, we're suggesting that the redefinition of architecture that we think is required in the face of the climate emergency requires a redefinition of nature from how it's seen within the context of the modern project, and particularly of our relations with and in nature, or what might be known as ecology. Christina.
We would like to begin our redefinition of ecology with a brief introduction of the Stoic term ikiosis, which has recently inspired our research. In contrast to ecos, generally cited as a root of the word ecology, which describes an idea of home as something closed and static, ikiosis depicts selves and lives as collaborative groupings or collective becomings that move together as they develop. It is a dynamic concept of habitat. In this light, ikiosis denotes something beyond appropriation or familiarization with the surroundings. It transforms the worldview of the living beings as they mature. Through ikiosis, we can perceive the world not as a static reality perceived by individual subjects, but as a shared reality in process, in transformation. So this worldview is often reflected in local knowledge systems, which challenge the established modern ways of thinking and being, moving towards alternative paradigms formulated through dialogical relations. It starts at the level of everyday life, providing multiple partial views, which are subjective, embodied, and diverse. These knowledge systems throughout the world are disappearing because they're not challenged through debate and dialogue. It is remarkable how the linearity of the established knowledge systems for universities, for example, disrupts the integration of local alternatives by declaring them illegitimate, thus breeding a monoculture of mind. Similar to monocultures of introduced plant varieties, which lead to the displacement of and devastation of local diversity, destroying the very conditions for diverse species. In natural ecosystems, habits are maintained by continual adjustments and correction between communities and organisms. Jane Jacobs extended this idea to human communities, speculating on interacting cultural habitat approach can lead towards a new language of the rural, for example, drawing upon ecological representations of diversity, complexity, sustainability, resilience, and vulnerability. As a result, the rural can no longer be easily equated with solely agriculture and farm work.
So this definition of ikiosis as opposed to ecos that Christina has given made really explicit. If we make this move, that willingly or otherwise we make our habitats and live side by side and in collaboration with more than human others. An architectural practice that might respond to this then would need to be radically more open, more collaborative, and more diverse than that which we see at present. And that's why we're here talking in this context of participation, which of course has been a significant part of architecture and design discourse since perhaps the 1960s, encompassing a variety of methods that seek to allow a greater number of voices and energies into the design process, beyond the single author that's characteristic of the image of the modern architect. We're not starting here with an idea of or a theory of participation as a means of achieving consensus. On the contrary, as one of our MOLD colleagues, Jeremy Till, wrote in 2005, participation presents a threat to mainstream architectural culture precisely because it makes a difference, it makes confrontation with difference inevitable, drawing out the conflicts and contests inherent in spatial production. Embracing this conflict and difference is key then to thinking about more than human habitats, since we need to account not only for a diversity of interests, but also differences in power and agency within a process. We're exposed to volatility of Earth systems, whether we acknowledge it or not. In our work, we're trying, and in this presentation, beginning to articulate a form of ecosystemic participation, or what we're calling radically open participatory practice. Tenets of this would be that it reflects the move from ecos to ekiosis, from something closed, bounded, out of time, to something open, contingent, incomplete, imprecise, ongoing, collaborative, always being reproduced through acts of maintenance, and acknowledging that we're part of nature and not separable from it, that we're making habitats within nature rather than making habitats for ourselves from nature. We recognize that the structures of capitalism impede the forms of collaborative world making that are required to develop these new forms of spatial practice in the face of the climate emergency.
To illustrate somehow this dynamic concept act on their own situations using their skills, knowledge, and experience. In our project, Architecture After Architecture, we are working on an extensive database of projects that suggest alternative ways of producing space that can part of addressing climate change, and which are constituted by a variety of practices, especially in rural and in depopulated territories, which is the context that I have been working in. We find communities promoting their own solutions to their needs, facing the lack of public means. Many rural initiatives and practices develop cohesion between activities and communities, leading to growing active knowledge networks. Many of these rural practices operate as common ownership collectives, where commons such as land, water, food, education, arts, crafts, and technologies are commonly used, shared, preserved, protected, and even produced. We found it really hard to choose particular practices to present to you today from our database. So we decided to briefly introduce you to the women cooperative Selimes and Suliotisis in Thesprotia, my region actually in Epirus here in Greece. Although I come from this particular region, I've never realized until recently this variety of self-organized initiatives, mostly by women, the last 3 decades. These cooperatives, associations, informal and formal organizations manage to keep these villages alive through bartering or by producing local products, by organizing social events in these areas, or helping families in need with food and care. They have managed to appropriate and reuse old abandoned school buildings for their work and meetings, rebuilding and repairing the spaces by themselves. Similar formats have been used by generations of women in the area who used to build their wood-fired ovens and their exterior kitchens together with, while moving with nomadic pastoral communities. This kitchen became later the milestones around which the communities organize themselves into settlements. The position of these women as caregivers for their partners, children, and in their family has transformed into a format of care for their community. So we value and identify these practices as spaces of resistance to the dominant order, providing post-growth imaginaries through various levels of organizing and producing. As Jeremy Thiel notes, the potential of practicing architecture through mutual support is a way of bringing multiple forms of knowledge and relationships together, and to depart from an extractivist approach driven by market-led spatial production. There are myriad traditions of mutual support practice throughout the world. Such initiatives and practices develop cohesion between activities and communities, leading to growing active knowledge networks. We need to keep reinforcing their interconnections in order to magnify their potential for co-survival.
We join others in suggesting that these traditions of mutual support could potentially be a platform for people to take action outside the institutions and value systems that give shape to the situation as we find ourselves in today. most insightful knowledges to face today's crises are found within such multiplicity of worlds, as they show cultural and ecological transitions that divert from commodifying human and natural resources. Such relational worlds are sustained by forms of knowledge established through social and ecological relations that are not definable by this dualist worldview that divides nature from culture and humans from non-humans.
Try to briefly sketch some ways in which radically open participatory practice can lead to more equitable, diverse, inclusive forms of world making. Relating these examples of existing practice to possible future scenarios, we tend into our project to foreground an approach to habitat maintenance that highlights interdependencies among living things. We call for greater appreciations of diverse livelihood practices engaged in by various interrelated communities. So ultimately, we seek to contribute to the ongoing dialogue for post-capitalistic production and to discuss how other worlds are made. Thank you.
So thank you, Christina. Thank you, Anthony. We have one more presentation, and that leaves us some time for discussion, if you are interested. Give me a second. So, up to Proto, okay. I think online through the Zoom platform, we have someone with us from the first paper, Participatory Approaches to Face Natural Hazards, the case of Kalloni Lesvos, flood mitigation measures selection. Is it true? Do we have someone here? Yes, we do.
Yes, good morning.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Okay.
No. Okay, go on. Yes. You
Okay.
already shared your screen?
Yes,
Okay.
it's time to
Thank you.
introduce myself to you. My name is Koutsovili Elena-Ioanna. I'm a civil engineer, and at the moment I'm also a PhD student in the University of the Aegean in Marine Science Department. My presentation today is titled Participatory Approaches to Face Natural Hazards, the case of Kalloni Lesvos flood mitigation measure selection. Our research team consists of Professor Ms. Ourania Tzoraki and the postgraduate student Mrs. Aliki Kalli. In this slide, you can see the outline of the presentation. First, I will be describing the subject and the study case, and then I will be referring to the methodology of the research. I will be focusing on participatory approaches according to the VCA methodology, vulnerability and capacity assessment, and on examination of nature-based solutions as flood risk mitigation options. Then I will be presenting the results and discussion for the interviews and participatory workshops which took place in Kalloni settlement. And finally, some conclusions will be reported. Starting with the subject of the research, natural hazards and especially floods are increasing the last decades in the urban environment, especially under the impact of climate change. Kalloni settlement in Lesvos Island, Greece, experiences hazardous floods with a frequency of 1 flood per 2.6 years. Such findings indicate the need for integrated water management and flood mitigation strategies in the area of Kalloni River basin. In this research, some participatory methods and community-based approaches according to the methodology developed by the Red Cross VCA are used to evaluate various nature-based solutions, NBS, and determine their design and implementation frameworks. As part of the approach, a diverse group of local stakeholders, experts, and decision makers joined a series of interviews and workshops aimed at prioritizing NBS proposed practices and addressing any potential barriers. The participatory workshops took place during the years 2018 to 2020 and the process consisted of 2 steps. The first step was some individual interviews and the pilot workshops in the research site, and the second step was 4 focus workshops with different focus groups, and more specifically with school teachers, farmers, municipality employees and community leaders, and finally with freelancers in the scientific and technical sector in the study area. The participatory tools that were selected from the methodology were focus group discussions, problems and the solution trees, and some research questionnaires for the evaluation of nature-based solutions. Therefore, some nature-based mitigation measures compatible with the needs and characteristics of the study case are examined for the Kalloni landscape. Proposed NBS are measures and actions that are inspired and supported by ecosystem processes and aim to increase resilience and mitigate flood risk in the wider area of Kalloni. Specifically, the team of researchers present 8 categories of nature-based solutions which focus on 5 subsectors: on agriculture, forestry, natural landscape and hydromorphology, on urban sector, and on mountainous surface water management. For the agricultural sector, the creation and maintenance of cultivated terraces and some flood-based farming systems were proposed, which channel the water towards agricultural fields during high water levels and flood periods. For the forestry, the nature-based solutions which proposed were afforestation, planting, and creating parcels from tree branches after fire. The latter is a traditional technique of smoothing the slope of the soil in mountainous areas. Moreover, the creation of small bodies of standing water in mountainous areas was also proposed for floodplain management in natural landscape and hydromorphology. Now, for the mountainous surface water management, the construction of small gabion or wooden dams is a very effective flood prevention technique, which controls the peak discharge in the mountainous part of the watershed. Finally, in urban sector, the rainwater harvesting and the creation of permeable urban surfaces were proposed by the research team. Rainwater harvesting is a valuable technique in an urban setting where collecting runoff from a building roof reduces the frequency and peak of stormwater flooding and supplies water to households, businesses, and farms. Finally, the creation of permeable urban surfaces such as pervious concrete, rain gardens, and green roofs allows precipitation and surface runoff to infiltrate into the soil, mitigating floods in urban areas. Now, here you can see some results from the interviews in the form of frequencies of reference on some issues. It is an attempt to visualize and group what is being sent during an interview by the person being asked. So, the codec technique was chosen through which a numerical dimension can be given. As you can see from the diagram, the interviewees more often emphasized the destruction of property and the financial consequences. They also blamed local actors and residents with the same frequency, as they felt that there was very little cooperation within the community for flooding problems. During the process of focus groups, it was clear that participants share common beliefs regarding the causes that make the area vulnerable to flash floods. They also share common misunderstandings, and they tended to propose invasive solutions, even if they did not clearly understand their function or appropriateness to the area. That quickly changed as they became familiar with the nature-based solution proposed by the team. In these pictures, you can see our workshops with the municipal employees of Kalloni settlement. A total of 51 participants were involved in this research, of which 65% were male and 33% were female. The order of priority to be given to each NBS according to each group of interest is illustrated in this graph. As you can see, there is a significant declination in the preference of stakeholders for urban projects, as all groups except farmers give a fairly low score. However, the views of the groups seem to converge on a low preference of agricultural projects. The following chart presents the score for each project by each group of interest participated in the workshops. It is observed that the small dams and afforestation have the highest score in terms of expected efficiency, with all group of participants agreeing theory. Finally, it seems, as in the previous diagram, there is a significant deviation between the groups in terms of grading urban projects. To conclude, based on the attendance and evaluation, it can be considered that the participatory workshops were completed successfully. During the discussion, it was clear that the participants were well informed around the causes of floods in the area, even if some of them had misunderstandings. It is observed that the participants were skeptical about the process in the beginning as a result of the lack of participatory approaches in Greece, and especially in rural areas. Following the assessment, it can be said that the measures under consideration, such as the temporary flooding of private land and the creation of rainwater harvesting in the Kalloni village, would enhance the resilience to flooding and eventually replace the need for difficult and costly technical projects. This research provides a quantitative framework for policymakers in small intermittent flow river basins such as Kalloni to plan and manage the expected future challenges of river discharge and flood occurrence. Thank you very much for your attention.
We thank you. And we thank all the participants. So we know that the fourth presentation will not be held. So we have about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, which is good if you're interested in having a discussion. I don't know if we have something from the platform. No, we don't at the moment. So are there any questions or cross questions or comments that you want to have between the participants? Anything?
I have one.
Yes, Anthony, we can hear you.
For Christina's presentation, the other Christina, the first presentation on algae texture, I found it a really interesting presentation. Some of my former research is on groundwater in Chennai in India, and I was just wondering if there's something particular about the form of management and kind of aquitecture or algae texture that you just described, which could only be possible through this kind of participatory management process or kind of community resource management process that distinguishes that kind of project from something else.
The dolls on the camera.
So about that, if I understand well, because the connection is, I mean, in Lausitz, now they are trying, it's a form of coal mining, so they are trying to find solutions around these areas and how they can participate people in this kind of procedure. So there are a lot of questionnaires, and they are trying to engage, for example, citizens in this rural area, because it's a rural area. So, for example, they were trying to engage farmers, citizens, and of course, it's a questionable, and they are trying either with these technical lakes to find solutions and to transform this area to a touristic area, or either engage people more and trying to find solutions for the citizens there. That's why they're trying to build the infrastructure, for example, mobilities, train infrastructure, in order like people that stay in Berlin go to Lausitz, because I mean Lausitz is really close to Berlin now. I don't know if I respond to your question, but you can. You are on mute.
I wasn't saying anything. Thank you.
Anything else here or through the Zoom platform? Okay, I do have a question, like a horizontal question to all the projects. So my idea is that we are talking about participation and more broadly the environmental question. I don't know if I put it correctly, but my question would be that does this environmental question makes us or forces to reconceptualize what public participation is or not? Does the climate change or anything else that is described as environmental problem make us as researchers, as practitioners and so on, to redefine and use a different way of what is public participation? Or is it more or less the same as we learn to use it mainly through urban studies and the reinvention and the redesigning of the public space in the city? Does it make any difference or not, according to your opinion? Yeah, or you can, most of us are here, or we can start with a Zoom presentation if you want to comment on what I just said, and then we go on here with the people that are here with us. I don't know.
Yeah, shall I try and say something about that?
Yes.
It's a great question. I mean, I'm coming to this not as someone who's an expert or kind of tooled in participation as a discipline, but from my point of view, the climate emergency, the environmental crises, the multiple environmental crises, they demand, I think, a kind of more participatory practice, because we see how the interests that lead through finance and other mechanisms, the things that get done in the world, do not have a collective conscience or a collective interest. They do not do. We can see this in the recent failure of COP or of any of these kind of things are directed towards states and companies in order to do things for us. Okay, we know it's not going to happen now. So I think the climate crisis demands a form of participatory practice, which is not only inclusive and engaging in that kind of small way that traditional participation is, but is really radically participatory. And there was a really interesting panel yesterday in this conference on citizens' assemblies, deliberative decision making, and these kind of really important processes. In my question there, I alluded to community resource management and these ideas that have been around for a long time of the sort of a form of self-interest of people in relation to the resources that they rely on and which keep them alive. So this is a mutual thing, needs to be engaged within decision making somehow. And I think that's been around for a while, but the environmental crisis makes it more crucial, more vital, and demands it comes into the fore. That's my perspective.
Yeah, then
So I agree with Anthony, and if I might add something, I have the feeling that a lot of times we consider or we think of participation based on the urban environments most of the times, like citizens and community boards, and how can we build and rethink our public space together. And I have the feeling that there have been practices, and we have seen practices all over the world, also in the rural areas, that they have been engaging in mutual building, community building, and practices of mutual support for so long right now, and involving not only human beings, no, but involving also the non-human beings. So when we talk about participation, we should think in the face of climate. In the face of climate emergency, I have the feeling that we need to have this more open and ecosystemic approach in involving different living agents within these participations. And yeah, I have the feeling that we need to see what we can learn also from these practices. Only Anthony.
Okay, if there are... Thank you for your answer and comments. I don't know if there is any extra comment or question here. Yes. It would be better to come here or use the...
Well, I liked this horizontal question, and mine is, I suppose, an extension to that. I do think that the climate emergency requires participatory processes in a more intensive and inclusive manner. But I also think that in reality, it implies a shift, a paradigm shift in the economic and political sectors. It requires, let's say, a systems change, a whole system change. And I would like to ask again the speakers if they realize that this is the case. I suppose what I'm saying is that what may be happening in small scale communities is absolutely essential and great, but is it enough vis-a-vis the great scale in terms of politics and the economy? I wonder, I suppose it's a rather profound question, but I just had to express that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, we do have some time, so feel free to jump in and comment on what you just heard or something. I just want to I'm not a panelist, I'm a moderator, but I take this authority to continue just a bit the discussion. My idea is really of not intensifying or empowering public participation. My idea is of reconceptualizing. I really do think that there is a need for reconceptualizing and make it more maybe more meaningful, I would say. I don't want to be like, I don't know. Anyway, I'm just saying that the energy, environment, and all these questions, in a way, not forces us, but makes us rethinking of how we can make public participation more meaningful and more inclusive. Just that was my idea. So it was, if it goes back to us as researchers, academics, and so on, to reconceptualize and make a new notion of what public participation is in order to address all these environmental challenges. Anyway, I leave it here because I took too much authority again, and I didn't have to do so. But really, the panelists feel free to comment or say you have the last word on whatever you'd like to say.
Change that climate emergency. Yes.
Because they lost you in the Zoom.
They lost me. I'm here. So in the project that we have been working on, architecture after architecture, we departed actually from this exact point that climate emergency demands systemic changes. And systemic changes into the economic systems, to social systems, which include also the radical or alternatives or ways of participation. And I have the feeling that the way to somehow create, this bigger impact, it should be to form, that's my feeling, to form networks. These kind of networks of knowledge between all these different practices that now they are like acting in a small scale, but I have the feeling that it could be create like a systemic change if we manage to form these interconnections and interrelations between all of these nodes at the moment. I don't know if you would like to add something on it, Anthony.
No, it's really good. Yeah, it's exactly what Christina said. Is we start from the question of what you said about yes, it demands systemic change. We also think about scale, and so you're quite right to say, well, it's nice what's happening in some small habitat in rural Greece, but it's very difficult to see how that can make a significant change. And our attitude to that is to say quite straightforward things like as Christina says, we need to collectivize, we need to form networks, we need to collaborate. These are the things we kind of already knew. But it's because we're not really interested in a kind of grand project of solutions, which would be typical of a kind of modern approach to the getting away or getting past the climate crisis. Okay, we're going to stay in it, we need to live in it. But how do we scale these things that we see, that we find in the world now? So we say that the practices we need in order to approach the climate crisis are already in the world. They're just small, they're localized, they're confined, and they're also limited by the larger structures that they exist within. So we're interested in how those small moments, or what we're kind of calling seeds, can grow, but also disrupt, genuinely disrupt, rather than be captured by the larger systems that they're a part of. And that's the really difficult bit. And we, like Christina says, we found it quite hard to pick some examples for this conference, because it's something we're working on and developing. But it's probably that nothing we find is quite perfect, but in the ways that lots of these really positive, really encouraging, actually existing practices can maybe combine with elements from other actually existing practices, there could be potential for them to scale and grow and amplify and spread and really truly disrupt the problematic nature of the system that they're stuck in at the moment.
I think that's it. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being through the web platform. And we continue with the conference. You have 3 minutes break and we go on. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.